Humanity is innumerable, spread across the stars, with a military might befitting a galaxy-spanning empire like the Imperium. And yet, for all their numbers, there are a few individuals within humanity, or those who are ascended beyond it, who have become renowned even beyond their peers. In this series of vlogs, we shall take a look at some of those Adeptus Astartes, a particular legend in this modern era, known collectively as the Champions of Humanity. Today, we explore a born warrior who not only survived the hell of his home world, but has led his chapter with all the zeal and fury they are renowned for, even said to rival the Primarch himself. Though extremely insular, beyond typical for Astartes, he is prideful and honourable, even willing to butt heads with the leaders of the Imperium on the basis of his own principles. He is the chapter master of the Space Wolves, the Great Wolf, the High King of Fenris. He is Logan Grimnar. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to Champions of Humanity, a 40k Stories mini-series. As with all Space Wolves, who pretty much cannot recruit from anywhere else nowadays unless they're Primaris, Logan Grimnar was born and raised on the usually icy death world of Fenris. His exact year of birth is unknown, but it will have been around 300 M41, as he came to the attention of those known to the natives as the Sky Warriors in 313 M41. His early life will have been nomadic, harsh, and filled with violence. When you live on a planet that has volcanic eruptions in summer, murderously cold winters, and Catachan-level lethal fauna, just surviving is an achievement, but as the populace are tribal in nature, inter-human conflicts are also very common. It was during one of these wars that Logan would find his way to the ranks of the Sons of Russ, being embroiled in battle with two other tribes over recently emerged landmass. Though his fellows were overwhelmed, Logan was able to fight on and eventually win out, all whilst being observed from above by a wolf priest, the equivalent to chaplains and apothecaries within the Space Wolves. These are the individuals who recruit new warriors to the ranks of the Astartes, and this wolf priest had seen enough to bring Logan into their number, sensing greatness within him that was also picked upon by one of his fellows, a certain Ulrich the Slayer, as he may or may not have been known at the time. Once taken as an aspirant, Logan was put through the same harsh trials as all Space Wolf recruits. It seems to vary a lot from individual to individual, year to year, and so on, but it culminated roughly in what is known as the test or the trial of Morkai. This is the point at which the Canis Helix, a fundamental part of Space Wolf gene seed, is introduced to the aspirants, before they're thrown out of the fortress monastery the Fang and forced to make their way back fighting the elements, the wildlife, and the curse of the Wolfen that has plagued the chapter since the days of Leman Russ. Many fail the test, turning into some of the beasts that hunt the next wave of aspirants, but Logan passed with aplomb, even taking out one of the great beasts out there, an ice troll known as Frostblood that had slain dozens of aspirants over the years. This cemented the supposed greatness seen in him, and once he had passed through the remaining trials, he became a full member of the Space Wolves chapter. However, he did not become a scout, as would be the case in most other chapters, as the Wolf Scouts are instead outsider elites drawn from the ranks of the tactical marines known as Grey Hunters. Instead, Logan was placed into the great company of Wolflord Asvald Stormrack as a Blood Claw, melee fighters in full power armor so as to join the pack. It seems as though Grimnar excelled, quickly passing into the ranks of the Grey Hunters that, as I said, are sort of but not entirely analogous to tactical squads, and a sign of a more tempered and less impetuous mind. There he would remain for the best part of half a century, until 357 M41 and the Battle of Blood Falls on the planet of Hesperia, location sadly unknown. During this battle between Chaos Space Marine forces and the Space Wolves, Logan was able to defend Wolflord Stormrack as he was pinned under the wreckage of the twisted dreadnoughts known as Hellbrutes. This single-handed defense won over the Wolflord, who promoted Grimnar to the veterans of his great company, the Wolf Guard, on the spot. Yeah, if you hadn't already noticed, Space Wolf structure is radically different from typical chapters. Leman Russ and everybody after him pretty much stuck up the middle finger at the Codex. Were it not for this act, it could have been decades until Grimnar earned his spot in the Wolf Guard, Promotion is based solely on the will of the Wolf Lord, with respect being earned and heroism being proved, though, as we see here, saving the boss's life is a very useful shortcut. In fact, it's pretty much got a 100% success rate. We do not know of any other battles in this early career of Logan, neither during his time pre or post Wolfguard, until the war for the Cyclopean Rift on the presumed hive world of Xylor 9 in 415 M41. At the climax of the battle, the Orc Warlord and Stormwrack faced off, with both being mortally wounded and ultimately dying. With his death, there was a vacancy for the role of Wolflord, and like other chapters, a vote of sorts was held to elect Asvald's successor. Logan had been kept close to Stormwrack as a council of sorts, and he was unanimously voted as Wolflord by the other Wolf Guard, taking command of the great company that was renamed and subtly shaped in his honour. There are 12 great companies in total, technically 13 if you count the lost one, but they're not numbered. Leadership of the chapter jumps from company to company depending on which Wolflord is elected as Chapter Master, or otherwise known as Great Wolf. However, Logan would not remain simply as a Wolf Lord for all that long. 25 years later, in 440 M41, Great Wolf Sigvald Grimhammer was slain by Drukari on a world called Zor, with an X, not a Z. Never mind my pronunciation. When the vote was cast among the Wolf Lords to elect his successor, again the vote went unanimously in favour of Grimnar, who was likely amongst the youngest of them. Quite how they'd been won over so convincingly is unclear, though I suspect Logan's personality, more on that later, and probably having Ulrich the Slayer as a backer, went a long way in the matter. The sigil of Logan's great company was then changed to the wolf that stalks between the stars as a mark of his ascension, and he became the chapter master of the Space Wolves. Quite how many there have actually been over the years is unknown, but there's been at least 25. We know the name, but sadly no dates for the 23rd, plus we know about Grimhammer and Logan. I'd wager the number's higher than for other X-Legions just because the Wolves have a lot of bravado and thus do a lot of melee and thus can get randomly killed, but I can't say for sure with any certainty. It might just be a similar number to the Ultramarines or the Blood Angels. Logan Grimnar's first known engagement as Great Wolf was a big one, taking place 4 years after his ascension, the First Armageddon War. The Space Wolves had recently been reassigned to the sector, and so when the World Eaters and their demonic Primarch Angron led the invasion of the Linchpin Hive World, the entire chapter, perhaps, was able to respond under Grimnar. Though not fast enough to save the continent of Armageddon Prime, the Wolves and the Armageddon Steel Legion were ready to meet the forces of Khorne at the Cheyron River. Logan saw plenty of action in the fight, even recovering what would become his signature weapon that we'll touch on later. But when it came to taking on Angron, the Great Wolf knew his limits. Unlike many Space Wolves who would boldly yet brashly have charged the Daemon Primarch, Grimnar used his brain and planned accordingly. At a predetermined signal, an entire brotherhood of Grey Knights Terminators teleported into the fray, and despite massive losses, they were able to banish Angron back to the warp, at least for the time being. Armageddon was saved, and the forces of Khorne were routed, but what followed showed the character of Grimnar whilst also driving a rather dangerous wedge into relations with other Imperial organisations. As is common following incursions of this scale, the populace of Armageddon was to be wiped out and replaced quietly for fear of corruption, but Logan refused to let it happen lying down. What started as a simple attempt to protect the civilians and soldiers without retaliation eventually exploded into all-out Cold War. The Wolves never attacked the Inquisition even when fired upon. They'd have probably been sent as excommunicat traitores if they had, but they saved many, many lives, and then cost a lot because a lot of worlds were subjected to exterminatus. Eventually, a parley was called, but the Grey Knights attacked the Space Wolves fleet instead, and when Logan came aboard the inquisitorial vessel, he struck down the Grey Knights Grand Master before teleporting away. These events, known amongst the Grey Knights as the Months of Shame, culminated in the Wolves' homeworld of Fenris being besieged by the Inquisition, the Grey Knights, and the Red Hunters chapter called in by the leading Inquisitor. This was the final straw, and as negotiations broke down with Bjorn the Fell-Handed, first ever Great Wolf and one of Leman Russ's own Wolf Guard, Grimnar led his remaining fleet in an all-out assault. Logan personally slew the Inquisitor responsible for the whole mess, but was convinced by Bjorn to stand down before the two sides caused irreparable damage to one another. The Inquisition did withdraw, though animosity and distrust remains between both parties, as you might expect. Following this incident, things kind of got back to normal, and Logan continued to lead the Space Wolves to glory his way. Before the century was out, he is known to have led the counter-assault against an uprising on the world of Palacia, using both skill in battle and his charisma to rally the Loyalists and get things back on track. Later, when the Space Hulk Well of Darkness passed into real space near Fenris, it was Grimnar who led the purge of the aliens within. Their species is unknown, but it's a little early to be Tyranids. I'm not sure. Despite falling through dozens of decks and becoming stranded, the Great Wolf was able to fight his way back and met his wolf guard covered in ichor and grinning from ear to ear. Space Wolves. Things would not be so simple in 621 M41, however, when word reached his ear of the discovery of a stasis pod containing one of the Wolf Brothers, a failed attempt at a Space Wolf successor with unstable gene seed that was especially susceptible to the curse of the Wolfer. Whilst this was usually good news, as it would allow the lost brother to be spared from corruption or death, the traitorous Black Legion held the frozen word of Lumerius that it was on, and Fabius Bio was present, presumably looking for him. Quickly assembling his great company, the Old Wolf, as he was now nicknamed for his age, making me think there's been a lot of great wolves over the years, made haste for the world to prevent the self-styled Primogenitor from unleashing corrupted wolfen-like creatures on the galaxy. Before they could do that, however, they had to deal with the superior Black Legion fleet that was present over Lumerius, which forced a daring boarding action to destroy the bridge and magazine of the main cruiser. Logan and his company's champion, the Man Mountain and former Iron Priest known as Aryak Rockfist, saw to the latter of the two tasks, and the Chaos Lord Voidheart was driven from the bridge by other members of Logan's company. Once Planetfall was finally made, Bile and the Black Legion search party were quickly located, and a combined drop pod and teleport assault was launched, with Grimnar and his bodyguards seemingly striding from the seas themselves into the downed ship containing the Wolf Brother. Fighting through demon engines and who knows what else, the Old Wolf and the Primogenitor finally came face to face in battle. For all his skill, Grimnar actually lost, as Bile used a warp-cursed weapon to cripple him, but thanks to the intervention of Rockfist forcing Bile to retreat, no lasting damage was done. With the Chaos Forces driven off, the Wolf Brother was found soon after, with his casket returned to Fenris rather than allowing the already part Wolf and Astartes to awaken and then probably have to be put down. It would be over a century until Logan's next known battle, and even longer until an engagement happened that we really know much about. This was the battle for the moon of Genosis Secundus in 787 M41, a vengeance campaign for the scouring of the world Gnosis Prime by the Eldari of Craftworld Saim-Han. Landing on the lush moon, the Space Wolves soon found themselves walking into a trap, as the forests were laced with monofilament wires that ensnared and damaged them. Despite vicious fighting, it took a carpet firebombing to give the Space Wolves the edge back, incinerating the Eldari and the snares alike, and forcing the Xenos to retreat. After a brief lull, the fighting intensified to its climax as the wolves attacked the base of the Eldari and their webway portal, with Grimnar playing off their arrogance to trap them in a pincer. Unfortunately, despite failing to break for the webway before being caught up to by the Old Wolf, the Autarch in command was not slain and eventually made his escape. The Space Wolves were victorious, but Grimnar knew he would have his vengeance eventually. He hasn't yet, as far as we know, but if the opportunity comes, I'm sure that, well, if he can, he'll be taking it. As if making enemies of the Inquisition and the Administratum of Segmentum Solar wasn't enough, Logan managed to end up on the wrong side of probably the next most powerful branch of the Imperium too, the Ecclesiarchy. In 886 M41, an ecclesiarchal team visited Fenris, hearing reports that the Space Wolves worship false gods. I mean, they don't worship the Emperor, they know him as the Allfather, and Leman Russ is known to have met a Fenrisian deity at the Warp during the Horus Heresy, so it's not an unfounded charge, I suppose. Any suspicions those delegates might have had will have only been heightened when the ever-insular Logan outright refused to let them enter the Fang, and even more so when they attempted to dock with the Fortress Monastery anyway and had their cruiser blown out of the sky. Grimnar proved he wasn't to be taken lightly, so when the Ecclesiarchy tried again a year later, they came prepared, all but invading Fenrisian space, backed up by 3 full orders of the Adepta Sororitas. As with the Months of Shame, there was no true victor here, though it seems no priest was brokered this time, and the ecclesiarchy just let the matter go and left after a few weeks of heavy fighting. I suppose they just had bigger things to do. As the final century of M41 began, Logan led the finest of the chapter in the 30th of what are known as Great Hunts. These are partly mini crusades against the enemies of man, and the 30th proved to be highly successful in that regard, but it was ultimately a failure in its primary goal of finding clues leading to the Primarch Leman Russ, who disappeared after the Horus Heresy. Whilst there were other battles fought across this century, most notably against both Trajan the Infinite and Imhotep the Stormlord on separate occasions, Grimnar was especially busy as M41 ended, despite not being as directly involved in the events known as the Gathering Storm. The chain of events he is involved in began at the Battle of Neurides, though Logan himself wasn't there. The great company of Harold Deathwolf were doomed to be overrun by a force of demons when they were saved by none other than the Wolfen, presumably some of whom were the original 13th Company lost during the burning of Prospero. Unlike the Legion of the Damned, who pop up out of nowhere then vanish, the Wolfen stick around and were brought to Fenris by the company they saved, with a huge debate breaking out over what should be done with them. Though Ulrich would proclaim the return of Leman Russ was imminent, it was the young Wolf Lord Ragnar Blackmane who proposed the eventual solution: the hunt for the Wolfen, where the Space Wolves would travel the stars and keep the other appearing Wolfen safe from authorities like the Inquisition, who probably were just looking for any excuse after what happened on Armageddon. All the Wolf Lords and great companies, save one, would pursue their own hunts, usually fighting against the forces of chaos along the way, and generally meeting with great success. Logan's own company ended up on the shrine world of Vicurus, fighting alongside the Adeptus Sororitas and later joined by the Grey Knights under brother Captain Arvan Stern. With the aid of the Grey Knights, Logan was able to take down a bloodthirster of Khorne, but as the battle was finally won, old animosity reared up and Stern demanded Grimnar's surrender. As pretty much always, the old wolf was having absolutely none of it, but rather than attack the Grey Knights, he explained the whole Wolfen situation to Stern. The two came to an understanding, and Stern warned Grimnar of a major move being made on Fenris itself by none other than the Thousand Sons, the traitor legion the Space Wolves had put to the sword in the early Horus Heresy. And boy was it a move that Magnus the Red and his pseudo-reunified sons were making, as the entirety of the Fenris system was brought under siege. Fenris's moon Valdemani was under the influence of Tzeentch. Nurgle had the world Midgardia in his crypt, the Alpha Legion attacked the world of Frostheim, and its moon Svelgard was besieged by Khorne's forces. The Space Wolves rushed back to defend their home, with a wider Imperial coalition also arriving independently, and Grimnar joined Egil Ironwolf in attempting to liberate Midgardia. As they were stretched out by the fighting, the Great Wolf's contingent came face to face with 3 members of the Infernal Tetrad, a quartet of demon princes with one dedicated to each Chaos God. The Tzeentch member was slain elsewhere by Stern and Wolf Lord Crom Dragongaze, but it's unknown whether Grimnar was able to take down any of the other 3. And whilst he was tied up on Midgardia, the Primarch known as the Crimson King made his biggest move, as Silver Towers landed on Fenris and began a ritual that allowed Magnus to enter real space once again on the home of the Wolves. He'd been there 9,000 years ago and lost. This time, he was going to do it properly. Logan was able to escape from Midgardia eventually, and along with the Grey Knights subjected the world to exterminatus. Rushing back to Fenris, the Old Wolf attempted to trap Magnus with an orbital strike as the Crimson King attacked the Fang, but was in turn trapped by the sorcery of Magnus and forced to retreat, only to run into Chief Librarian Arzek Ahriman. Eventually, Logan was able to get back toward Magnus, though of course he was unable to kill Ahriman. And as Eagle Ironwolf attempted to attack the Primarch with the Spear of Russ that had nearly killed Horus in the Heresy, Logan got his chance to strike. I'll explain why in a moment, but he was somehow able to wound and weaken the Daemon Primarch, allowing the Grey Knights to banish him, even though the Thousand Sons were still able to translate their new home Sortiarius into real space over Prospero, using the death of Midgardia as fuel. Fenris itself was saved, well, just about, and the rest of the system somewhat with it, but there were still consequences coming for the home of the wolves. As after Angron's appearance on Armageddon, the Inquisition arrived or was already there to deal with the human survivors. But unlike after Armageddon, Logan did not stand in their way despite not being on board with the idea, and the humans of Fenris, perhaps the only recruitment pool the Space Wolves had, were perhaps almost entirely annihilated. The vengeful wolves, probably just looking for blood and someone to hit that wasn't an Inquisitor, rushed to join the 13th Black Crusade, managing to put aside their differences with the Dark Angels to work in concert against forces led by Typhus, Herald of Nurgle. I assume that, following the ritual in honour of Lionel Johnson and Leman Russ's legendary fight, Logan would cross blades with Azrael after the fighting is done, but that was unknown. The wolves are not known to have been present for the fall of Cadia or the events that followed, and in truth their history following the appearance of the Cicatrix Maledictum remains unclear for the moment. We know that Primaris Space Marines have been founded from their gene stock, though their reaction to it remains unknown, and Logan's personal tale in this era has yet to come to light. I suspect it involves a lot of taking names of Chaos people and probably trying to burn Prospero 2.0, but we'll see. To conclude, the obligatory character profile segment, where we take a look at Logan's war gear and his personality. Before the First Armageddon War, Grimnar is known to have used a frost blade, a chainsword variant unique to the Space Wolves that is more comparable to a power weapon in other chapters. Unfortunately, said weapon was broken in a duel with the Khorne champion Acor Doomflayer, but Grimnar was still able to kill the champion by ripping out his throat with his teeth. Space Wolves. Logan then grabbed Doomflayer's own axe and cut his way back to the Space Wolf lines, and despite it being a weapon of chaos, he would be able to keep it after the battle. On his return to Fenris, the weapon was reforged into the weapon Logan has used ever since, the Axe Morkai, named after the Fenrisian Guardian of the Dead, that can be wielded one- or two-handed depending on need. However, the origins of the weapon still linger within it. The Axe Morkai was believed forged by none other than Khorne himself, and during the siege of Fenris by the Thousand Suns, it would pay dividends 100-fold in allowing Logan to wound Magnus, because Khorne hates Psykers, so that he could be banished. Probably best you don't ask how the Grey Knights haven't called Grimnar out on this yet, since they're so good usually with spotting demonic stuff, but they haven't. I just don't know. As for armour, Logan at least used to use a suit of Terminator armour known as the Armour of Asvald Stormrack. Despite being named after Grimnar's former Wolf Lord, the armour goes back thousands of years and has been passed down time after time. It has traditionally been worn by members of a Lord's Wolf Guard, which is still how it's done today. But as we don't know anything to do with Logan's own Terminator armour, it could be he sometimes uses it too. I don't know, maybe. Unlike literally any other Astartes I can think of throughout history, Logan has a very unique mount, a Thunderwolf-pulled chariot known as Stormrider. Supposedly around from the time of Leman Russ, it contains anti-gravity stabilizers but no engines. Combined with its force field projectors, it makes Logan and the two apex predators of Fenris that pull it exceptionally difficult to kill and ridiculously dangerous. As for his character, Logan is in many ways like the Primarch he hails from. Vicious in battle, with a thirst for it said to rival Leman Russ, but with a charm and charisma that was almost irresistible. It was this latter aspect of his personality that allowed him to win such respect from the other members of the chapter, even as a lowly Bloodclaw. And it will have at least contributed to his election as Great Wolf. I'm not sure he could quite go as far as Russ, who could go into a massive duel, get basically knocked out and laugh it off, but still pretty charismatic. Admittedly, it seems his charisma does not extend to diplomacy with other forces, given how poorly he handled the various affairs involving the Ecclesiarchy, and the Inquisition, and the Administratum, and the Grey Knights again, and yeah, all of those. This is because Logan is, for want of a better description, extremely insular. He brooks no outside interference with the running of the Space Wolves, which explains why the Ecclesiarchy were barred access to Fenris. He also seems to be, as some might say, a man of the people, given how far he was willing to go to protect the soldiers and citizens of Armageddon after the whole Angron affair. He's certainly not afraid to butt heads with big guns in the Imperium on a matter of principle, and though he can be tempered or persuaded not to, he'll happily resort to violence if he's poked. Admittedly, there is a whiff of hypocrisy regarding the treatment of Fenris's population after the return of Magnus. Maybe the fact that the Wolfen had returned, combined with the massive Imperial fleet hanging around, and the damage that Fenris had already suffered had forced his hand. But as much as he hated the idea, he did go along with it. But underneath all the fury and the wit, never forget that Logan Grimnar is a warrior king first, with a keen tactical mind. He's able to play up his supposedly savage nature to his advantage, lulling opponents into complacency exactly as he did on Gnosis Secundus. And we know he does know his limits because he didn't go and just fight Angron, instead calling in the Grey Knights. He might not be as renowned for his tactics as, say, Marnius Calgar, but Grimnar certainly knows his stuff, and I certainly wouldn't want to face off with him either in a strategium, and especially not on a battlefield. So ends the tale of Logan Grimnar. The High King of Fenris has ruled the Sons of Leman Russ for 700 years or more by now, having risen through their ranks with a disarming wit and a savage fury. Having shared a war zone on separate occasions with 2 Daemon Primarchs, even facing one down and defeating him to an extent, Grimnar is absolutely a deadly warrior who is not to be trifled with, and even in old age he leads with the same mix of bravado, skill and savagery that made him famous. It may be that Imperial history books will look on him with disdain, especially given his interactions with the administrative, Inquisition and Ecclesiarchy, but those civilians who know of the Space Wars can only at least respect, if not idolize, the old wolf. This is the 4th of our Champions of Humanity miniseries, looking at the greatest heroes of the Adeptus Astartes in the modern era. Next time, before we get to the next champion, I want to look at some very special Astartes related to a group discussed today. They're not exactly as crazy as the Legion of the Damned, but they're unique in a few ways, and though it will be a somewhat shorter log, I do wish to cover them. For now though, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.